Hey guys, what's up? This is the fourth video in my series on scale, so go check the other ones out if you haven't seen them. This is a video on distribution scaling, or in more colloquial terms, virality. Virality or distribution scaling is one of three types of scale. That is ways in which you can improve your unit economics compared to your competitors as you grow in size. And essentially, it works this way. In order to have virality, it must be true that the cost to acquire a new customer drops or falls as you acquire more customers. So by definition, the first customer you acquire is the most expensive one, and the last customer you acquire is the cheapest one. So we've seen a lot of very sort of fast scaling companies, both let's say historically, but also with software products. I think the last one that everybody is talking about is ChatGPT, which scaled to 1 million users in 5 days because everybody told their friends and everybody posted, let's say, product reviews on their social media everywhere. And then it just took over the world in record time. So we can see this essentially as a social virus that spreads from an initial user base to a broader user base over time. And this is exactly how it is measured. So virality is measured using something called the K factor, which is actually taken from epidemiology, from virus studies in medicine. And it works in this way. Every user, in virality patient, that you have in a period, how many patients are they coming in contact with, and what is the infection rate or conversion rate of those new patients. So one patient gets in contact with 10 other patients and the infection rate is 20%. So one patient then infects 2 people. So from period 1 to period 2, you will go from 1 to 3. So you'll add 2 more people who are infected. It's the exact same math that you work out with products, with the only exception that the attribution of infection and in contact with becomes really difficult to track and measure. But essentially, you should think of it conceptually in this way. If I sell to a customer, how many people are they going to tell? And how strong is this message that they're telling them with, so that they're actually drawn into my product and purchases or converts themselves into users? Because of this attribution problem, you usually have issues with measuring virality. So we can say, well, we're spending a lot on, let's say, outbound sales, and we're spending a lot of marketing dollars, and we also have some inbound, and separating these into sort of figuring out what your actual virality is can be difficult. So here is a version of the K factor that I often use to track with some of the customers I work with, but also the portfolio companies that I have invested in that I thought you might find useful. And it simply works as follows. For a given period, you say, how many customers have we acquired that are new, divided by how many customers we had in the previous period. So let's say that in this period, we acquired 50 new customers, and in the previous period, we had 100 customers. So we say 50 divided by 100 is 0.5 or 50%. So we grew 50% in terms of customers. Great, that is your K factor. Now, let's assume that this K factor is actually true, and that it holds over time. So you go from 150 customers to the next period, 225. And then you go to 337.5, right? So at every period, you add another 50%. So what you'll see is, let's say that you actually have some marketing spend. You have customer acquisition cost of whatever, $1,000. You do some Facebook advertising, something like that. What you'll see is in the first period, when you spend the $1,000 and you acquire the 50 customers, your customer acquisition cost per customer is $20. 50 customers in, at the cost of 1,000, divide the 2, $20 per customer. Now, next period, well, we got 75 new customers, right? So we get 50% off on top of the 150 that we had in the previous period. So now the acquisition cost, the $1,000, is constant. So now we acquire 75 new customers for $1,000. So that means that the customer acquisition cost per customer is $13 and change, right? And so on it goes until in period, whatever, 20, you're acquiring tens of thousands of customers per new time period, and the acquisition cost per customer is super, super low, fractions of a cent, right? Essentially, this is the trend line that we want to look out for. This is what is going to happen with the customer acquisition cost per customer over time. Is it staying constant or is it dropping, right? If it is dropping, you probably have virality. There is word of mouth or some other referencing going on that makes each new sale cheaper and with less friction than the previous one. That is good news. You should figure out why this is happening and try to make it happen more, right? We'll get into that in a little bit. Let's take the other example and see where we have something called a fake K-factor, right? So let's say that what is actually happening in this scenario where you have 100 customers and you acquire 50 more, and actually it isn't a case of virality at all. You're actually acquiring them. So the $1,000 that you spend on marketing is actually the thing that is acquiring the 50 customers. So if we run the same math, you'll say, well, you acquired 50 customers in the period due to your $1,000 spend. And so each one is at $20. And then what happens in the next period? Well, you acquire 50 more because you keep spending the 1,000, right? So the cost per customer is still 20. So now in each period, instead of having exponential growth, you just grow by 50 customers because that is your spend. So you pay $20 to get a customer, you get a customer, you do it 50 times with $1,000, and that is your growth rate. So, in 20 periods, you will have acquired 20 times 50 customers. So that's 1,000 customers, and good for you. Might be a good business, but it isn't virality, right? So what we see here is that the K-factor that we're measuring, so in the beginning we're saying, oh, we're gonna measure the K-factor. We're gonna say, well, we acquired 50 customers, so we had 100 in the previous period, divide the two, it's 0.5, it's 50%. But in the next period, if you measure the K-factor, now you have 50 customers divided by customers in the previous period, which is 150. So now the K-factor actually drops to what, 33? And then in the next period, you will have 50 new customers compared to 200, so it drops to 25 and so forth. And the K-factor will drop towards 0. So CAC, customer acquisition cost and patience, will be constant, but the K-factor will drop over time. So you'll see one of these two things, either the CAC drops or the K-factor drops as you measure old customers and new customers across time period. And then usually so this is sort of the basic conceptual, let's say, clean scenarios. Either you have perfect virality and the marketing actually doesn't do anything, or the marketing and the actual customer acquisition cost is doing all of the work and you actually have no virality. So that means that either the K-factor drops or the CAC drops, but not both. In most cases, you will actually see a combination of both. You will see that, oh, what happens actually is that the K-factor drops, but so does the CAC. And what you have to do here is measure the two across time and figure out where they flatten out. So let's say that, well, you actually have something like a true customer acquisition cost with your outbound spend of something around, let's say, $50 or something. So that means that the $1,000 you spend actually will acquire you 20 customers, right? So every time period you acquire 20 customers. But you also have a K-factor of, let's say, 0.20. So every time you get a customer, that customer grows your customer with 1/5, 20% of a new customer in the next period. So 100 customers will become 120, will become 144 by themselves over time, but you're just adding 20 paid customers as well. So, and these 20 customers having been acquired will of course also compound, because even though they were bought, they will still like the product and tell their friends. I'll show you the math here in a spreadsheet, but essentially what you'll see is that the CAC will tend to actually trend downwards, and finding the actual CAC in this is actually difficult because you have to use a lot of attribution and so forth. But true CAC is actually $50, while the overall CAC, the way you would normally calculate it, which is just like new customers divided by the total spend on sales and marketing, generates the CAC. So Here what we see is that the K factor actually trends over 20 periods down toward its true level, which is 20%. So it starts, let's say, artificially high when the marketing spend compared to the reality is pretty big at 50, and then it drops and then stabilizes at 20 and stays at 20, because at 20%, at this level of volume of business, the additional customers that you're buying with your marketing spend actually doesn't do anything. The virality has now taken over and has by far the largest effect on your acquisition, right? So what we'll see is that the CAC will just keep dropping on a, let's say, normalized CAC level, while the true CAC, the actual cost to go out and find a customer, pay for it and get it in, stays the same. I usually do these things with the companies that I work with is and say, okay, so what's your growth and what is causing that growth? And are we seeing that there is any kind of potential K factor? And in order to do so, it really helps to just take a common sense look at the business. Like, what would happen here if growing over time? And one thing that we see is that, well, a lot of businesses will have word of mouth. So I will like the product, I will meet someone that is like me because that is who I hang out with, and then they will mention something that makes me think of the product, and I will mention the product, and now they have, they are pushed or have a call to action to go check it out. Some products do not have word of mouth, even though they're very successful. So I once helped a hypnosis technology, so it was a hypnosis app, and it had tremendous success with getting people off of cocaine, right? It had hundreds of reviews that where people say it had changed their lives and they saved their lives and their family lives and so forth. How much virality did they have? 0, because people don't want to talk about these things with their friends, right? It's the same with other things. So you have products that even though they're really successful in delivering the value to the user will not, for social reasons, tell anyone else about it. Compared to another piece of software I worked with that did contract management, this system would essentially, it's like PandaDoc and signatures and sign it and whatever you have out there. You have a document, I send it to someone for them to sign. They now get the interface and I have to sign it using this new software. So I am now prompted to create an account, experience the product, and then maybe use it for myself. So some products through their user journey has built-in virality. So you're probably somewhere in between. And my own business, for example, as an advisor, is built on virality as well. And I just historically can see over, let's say, 5 or 6 years that I've been doing this, that I tend to grow something around 60 to 80% on my top line revenue every year without doing anything. So these videos are super new to me. I didn't start doing them until I had hit like well into 7 figures as a consultant. And the first 6 years was just word of mouth. It was just doing work, having customers tell people they knew, other founders or executives or investors or board members about, oh, there's this guy that knows about B2B SaaS pricing, you should go check him out. And then my phone would ring, I would get an email or get hit up on LinkedIn, and that's how I grew my consulting business. So I have enough of that now. So now I'm in a second phase where I'm saying, well, I have so much consulting business that I have to turn a lot of it away. And I still want to, let's say, serve the community that's done so much for me. So I'm giving these videos back, and maybe some of my knowledge can help you guys, even if we don't work together. So that's my premise for doing this. But it's just to say that the virality of doing good work and having people notice and mention you at the right time is really what is building a lot of businesses. But it doesn't necessarily show up straight away in the numbers because it could take time. And that is the last part that we need to touch on with respects to virality, which is, well, what the hell is a period, right? So we're saying, well, we had 100 customers in period 1, and in the next period we got 50 new customers. Well, is that a week? Is it a year? What is it? Well, you get to measure it however you want. And just from a reporting perspective, like how you want to talk to your like communicate internally and benchmark this and measure this and keep track of it and so forth, you'll probably have a monthly reporting system or quarterly reporting system or whatever you want to do. However, I think the way to actually measure it in terms of how this makes sense is that you have to add 2 things together to get to your time period. One is the sales cycle. So from the person gets to know you to they actually buy, there is a number of days. And you should be able to, if not precisely measure this, then at least roughly estimate. So let's say that that is 3 months. Then you need to figure out the second sales cycle or the adoption sales cycle of your product. And that essentially is the time it takes from someone buys until they are so convinced that it is a good product that they start telling people. And this depends. So let's say that you sell something that has a, it starts with a 3 months proof of concept process, and then you have a large implementation that takes another 2 months, and then essentially takes at least a quarter until you see results, right? So what is that? 8 months, right? So if you have software like this, then it will take 8 months from a buyer that is convinced that they have made a good decision, is going to really start being an evangelist and telling anyone about the solution, because they don't know, right? If I have to tell someone, I might tell that I'm doing this, but I might say, well, I don't know if it's going to work yet. I'm excited about these guys. I think what they're doing is smart, but I'm not really going out of my way to evangelize on behalf of the product, likely until I really see some positive results, right? This can be hacked. You can engineer your process, your second sales cycles, the adoption sales cycles, in such a way as to allow customers really positive experiences early on that will prompt them to be, say, wowed and go tell someone. So if you want your virality to increase, you essentially have two options to do so. You can say, well, I am going to make a better product or a better experience or better solution that will make more people, want to talk about me, and I can shorten my sales cycle and my second sales cycle, my adoption sales cycle, so that they will tell someone faster, and that will also cause growth. So if you have, assuming that you actually have a positive word of mouth, that people actually, want to tell more people, and the benchmark here, if you really want virality, you need to talk about churn as well. So the virality needs to be higher than your churn in whatever period you mentioned it as well, right? So that translated to net dollar retention and so forth. But usually what most people do not realize is that you have these two components. You have the value, which is, you can measure it through Net Promoter Score, or you can measure it with the K factor that I just did. But in order to really sort of push the K factor up or increase your growth through this virality concept, you can either, create a better product or shorten the sales cycle, or shorten the second or adoption sales cycle. So build in wow moments earlier to get people to actually tell someone. So what we see is that compared with the two other types of scale, cost scaling, which is the decrease of costs of delivery and production as your units grow. This is like a classic 101 manufacturing. And then value scaling, which is increased pricing power, mostly through network effects, but also through branding as you grow, compared with distribution scaling, which is the decrease of COG as you grow in numbers due to virality. Especially when combined, you have some really, really killer business opportunities. You could just crush a market if you hit it. And if you look at someone like Facebook, they actually had all of these, right? So it's code, so it's built-in scale there from a cost perspective to begin with. Then they have actually network effects with both being a marketplace, but also being an increase in the value for the user in the social network that they are gaining access to by participating in Facebook. And finally, they have distribution scale because, in order for me to get value from having my social network on Facebook, I need to tell all my friends, right? So I need to tell all of them that they need to get on Facebook so that we can communicate there so that it is more valuable for me. So Facebook actually managed to grow so rapidly because they had all three types of scale in there and became one of the world's first trillion-dollar companies, right? This is not the same thing as you have with ChatGPT. What you have with ChatGPT is just, it is so insanely cheap, free, compared to the value that it brings, and has such a large wow effect that I just simply want to tell everyone. So that is pure distribution scaling. And the factor here was what? From I heard about it to I had to try it myself to the time when I told all my friends about whatever I had used it for was what? Hours? I saw the prompt on LinkedIn. I went and created an account, I tried a few things, and then I went and told my wife. It was like 30 minutes, right? And then add that up over a couple of days, and then that compounding effect, if it's growing 50% per 50 or 30 minutes, then suddenly you have 1 million users in 5 days, right? So what we see here is that you don't need all three types of scale to really create a massive hit, but having all three types can really create a massive hit as well. So not all of these will be available to whatever business you're pursuing. Like if you have a laundry business, you probably have some cost scaling as you go along. You probably maybe also have some potential of doing some branding, but it's a long way down the road and maybe not the most opportune thing for you, but there will be scale at some point. But really, some other businesses lend themselves way better to this. So for now, I just hope that the K-factor and the distribution scaling makes sense to you, also in how it is different from the cost scaling and the value scaling. And in the next video, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I analyze product ecosystems and look for distribution scaling, value scaling, cost scaling potentials in products, how I advise founders and executives to build it, and how I try to sort of, let's say, quantify the opportunity as an investor. So keep an eye out for that one. And until then, I hope that you found this interesting and useful. I use it for myself. There might be other ways. I don't know about those, but this is what I do. So yeah, I hope take it and run with it. All right. Cheers.